Ja, hallo und herzlich willkommen. Hello and welcome everybody. It's great to have you all here for the special lecture at the beginning of the Gauss year, but special lecture, our guest of honor. And the beginning, the first address will be by our recently newly elected Vice President for Research and International Affairs, Markus Henke. Please.
Okay, thank you very much, Sandra. Dear Professor Cook, where is he? Here is he. Okay. Professor Cook, ladies and gentlemen, as Vice President, as new elected Vice President for Research and International Affairs, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you in this beautiful building, the aula of the Technical University of Braunschweig, and to this Gauss lecture. From this title of the speech alone, you can see our lecture will enrich our understanding and our mindset of mathematics new here, which is precisely what we as a university stand for. Thank you very much, Professor Cook, for coming to us and to bring this interesting field of research to us. Our university is distinguished by a close integration of fundamental research and application-oriented research and development. And as you know, the core research areas of the Technical University of Braunschweig, they include metrology, mobility, future cities, and engineering for health. And all these core research areas, they need mathematics. They need optimization problems and all these things, which are the basis of our research and the basis of our development here. So mathematics have always formed the foundation of this countless engineering and natural science disciplines in these research areas, and often regarded by students as the first massive hurdle of their studies, but yet an absolutely necessary one. So mathematic research and mathematical problems, they remain a strong visible partner in all of our work here at the university. I'm therefore particularly pleased that you are helping to highlight this fascination of research today. So, Professor Cook, thank you very much for joining us today, and we are happy to have you here. And I thank you for sharing your outstanding expertise with us today. And I wish us all an enlightening and inspirational afternoon. Thank you very much.
And with that, I hand over, as you know, this is the Gauss lecture, but the Faculty of Mathematics, Computer Science, Economics, and Social Sciences is also called the Carl-Friedrich-Gauß faculty. And our dean is here, Tilo Balke, to say a few words on behalf of our faculty.
Yes, thank you very much, Sandra. And also thank you very much for organizing this first Gauss lecture. So this is the very start of what will be next year, the Gauss year, and there will be a lot of talks and a lot of workshops and things happening there. So please keep an eye on our website. There will be notifications for what's going on. There will be a lot of programs going on. I'm very happy to have one of our esteemed colleagues here from the University of Waterloo in Canada. He came all the way to Braunschweig to deliver his talk on the traveling salesman problem, which is a problem that I was confronted with when I was a young student, right? I would have assumed it's solved by now, but we see there's still open to interpretation. We can still see and learn something about it, so kind of interesting. So basically, without further ado, it's an honor to have you here. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Braunschweig, and I'm very excited to see your talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Bill is getting ready. Time is of the essence when you do touring and traveling optimization and so on. But let me say a few words about him as a person. So as you can see, there's a University of Waterloo logo there. And I wouldn't be here today if the University of Waterloo didn't have some connection, because that's where I did my PhD. And there's so many students here, which is really, really wonderful. And I remember when I was a student, and I had heard a few things about optimization, and of all these famous people that are doing this great stuff, and most of them were in Waterloo at some point, or came from there, or went there, and so on. And what really, really amazed me and impressed me was that all these famous people who came up with these wonderful ideas, amazing ideas, groundbreaking, changing ideas, were so approachable, and that you could just talk to them. You can just learn from them, and they would be interested in your opinion and your well-being, and so on and so on. And that really, really had a huge impact on me. I see some colleagues from math nodding here, and I see so many faces that I know from lectures. And so this is really very, very wonderful for me to have Bill here. I don't know who of you remembers, most of you probably don't, where you were on March 12, 1991. You probably don't. I mean, we were discussing this yesterday, and some people say like, well, I didn't know my mother yet, but so on, things like that. So I remember, and you will see March 12, 1991 show up eventually at some point on one of the slides. There's a bit of suspense. So that was the week when I first met Bill at a workshop in a faraway location, a very nice location. And it was just amazing for me. There were so many wonderful people, and it was just great fun. And we've kept in touch over the years. And as you probably know, otherwise you wouldn't be curious and be here, Bill has done a lot of really amazing stuff over the years. He's won really, really great awards. And for me also, he's sort of not just the world best known expert for traveling salesman problems, and he'll tell you more about where all the traveling salesman shows up and comes up, but also for me, he's the personification of what computational science is about. It's not just about proving theorems, it's about doing things where you can compute solutions for difficult problems. And I'm very, very happy to have him here today as a colleague, as an expert, and as a friend. And without much further ado now, here's Bill.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Sándor. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thanks for so many of you for coming out. And also, I saw my old friend Uwe Zimmermann, who I met in 1982. I was just a little baby at the time, but it's so great to be here. The topic of my talk, the traveling salesman problem, or TSP for short, has a lot of nice properties, but one of the great ones is it's really simple to explain the problem. So you have a set of tasks that you need to do, and you want to travel around town, and you want to go the shortest distance possible. So you have a set of points you want to visit, and you want to do a circular tour, come back to your starting point. I mean, that's crazy simple. But if you see from this slide, this is from the World Economic Forum in Davos, this big collection of famous people. They put out a short report on the future of supercomputing, and their one-line summary talks about the traveling salesman problem. See, that seems crazy, right? These problems where, like yesterday, Sándor was taking me to a tour of the town, we quickly figured out a route to see all these top sites and come back. These short, tiny TSP problems are easy to solve, and I think that's what makes the problem so natural to all of us. It feels comfortable, something we live through. And yet, it's one of the most famous problems in computer science and applied mathematics. And it's sort of the poster child for complexity or possible unsolvability. So in AI computing, that's the CEO of NVIDIA, it's the most valuable company in the world. A couple of years ago, he's giving the keynote lecture to some 250,000 developers. And he uses the traveling salesman problem to talk about the power of the new CUDA software, hardware that they're introducing. And his focus is on this delivering packages. So each year, around 400 billion parcels are delivered to houses. And the final part of the delivery is actually a van going house to house, bringing the packages to your doorstep. So that's sort of the iconic example now of the traveling salesman problem, of having this van driving in a route, visiting all their stops, and coming back to the depot. For example, in quantum computing, this, I believe, is the quantum computing firm with the largest market capitalization in the world. They put out a perspective for potential investors, and the first problem that they mention of all those problems that they could possibly deal with their hardware is optimal routing. Again, the traveling salesman problem. Amazon, they of course have vans driving all over the place, driving to your homes. Finding short and safe trips for their drivers was important enough that they organized in 2021 a worldwide competition with a $100,000 first prize, and attracted over 2,000 programming teams from around the world, all trying to make the routing algorithms better for Amazon. And it's not just moving people or equipment. I mean, the name traveling salesman problem sounds like you're moving from place to place, but the problem rises also in genetics, machine scheduling, data science. Pretty much anytime you have to put things in order, that might be a traveling salesman problem. What I'm showing are some of the companies that requested licenses for our Concord TSP solver. So the code for solving the traveling salesman problem, written together with Dave Applegate, Bob Bixby, and Vasha Kwatel. Through this licensing process, we typically give it for low price. We're not making lots of money on this, but I get to learn about a new application every week or so. And if you look carefully, you realize I'm not much of a businessman, because up in the corner is NVIDIA, as I said, the most valuable company in the world. When they're just starting out, they requested a license to use Concord in their chip design. Their main product is making chips. They use that chip design. And in order to get a license, they offered a $25,000 grant, which I happily accepted, and I used that to buy some high-end graphics cards that I could use in optimization work. Well, just for fun, I asked Gemini, the Google Gemini, what if instead I asked it for $25,000 worth of stock? It says that would now be worth some $12 million. So yeah, that's bad luck, but it's still a nice application. And I quite like the variety of applications. I mean, it really shows the power of abstraction. So in mathematics and computer science, this is a very simple model. And because it's so simple, that's why it's appearing many places. So I'm quite happy about this, except for one thing. I've never had an actual salesman. No salesman's ever requested a license for Concord. And that seems a little sad, because salesmen used to be interested in the problem. This is a tour through southern Germany, from Frankfurt to Dresden, back to Frankfurt. And it appeared in a guidebook for salesmen in 1832. It's what the author recommended that salesmen should use. Right? A traveling salesman solving the traveling salesman problem. And I also like his statement. We believe that it's short as possible. He doesn't write, I know it's short as possible. Right? Because with 44 cities to visit, there's 44 there, he knows that there's just too many possibilities. He couldn't check them all. Right? And that's easy to see. Suppose you only have 5 points to visit. Well, the tour is going to be a round-trip tour, so it doesn't matter where you start. It's going to be a circle. So you start anywhere. You have 4 choices for the next city to visit, then 3, then 2, then 1. So 4 factorial, 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, 24 possible tours. So I drew them out here, and you actually see the tours repeat themselves, like the pentagon appears twice, because it's once in one direction and once in the other direction. So if you have an application where the direction of travel doesn't matter, symmetric problem, then you divide by half. So there's 12 tours through 5 points. That's simple. But at 22 points, there's 25 billion tours. That's too many to handle. For that reason, the popular press says 22 cities is impossible. It takes you 1,000 years on a laptop computer. Over the past decade, many journals published that. And the Tagesspiegel even upped it, said that would take 1,000 years on a supercomputer to solve. That's kind of sad, because that's not at all the truth. Indeed, I asked ChatGPT, how long would it take to compute 22 cities? And ChatGPT, says, well, if you take them one by one, it takes 1,600 years. But it goes on and said there's other methods, including a nice ad for our Concord TSP solver. See, and that's the point. You can't check them one by one, but that doesn't mean that's the only way to solve the problem. Think about sorting numbers. You have n numbers you want to sort from highest to lowest. You don't check all n factorial possible orderings to find the correct one, where there's other ways to sort. You might also then hope, well, there's other ways to solve the traveling salesman problem. Right? And this as a mathematics problem goes back to Carl Menger. Actually, if you're an economist, you know there's another Carl with a C. That was his dad. Carl Menger was a mathematician, Menger Sponge, you might know him from. In 1930, he proposed the traveling salesman as a mathematics problem, the geometric version. So you have points in space, and the distance to travel is a straight line, Euclidean distance. And what he asks is there a way to find the shortest tour without checking them all one by one? Right? So he wants a better than finite algorithm. Right? That's a deep question. So mathematics at the time wasn't concerned with complexity. Right? This is way before complexity theory or Turing machines. Turing's work didn't appear yet. But 1930 was a very interesting year for mathematics, especially in Vienna. There was this group known as the Wiener Kreis, where Menger was the main mathematician in that group, and he was the mentor of his great student Gödel. 1930 is the year that Gödel announced his incompleteness results. So Gödel was going after the foundations of logic, whereas Menger is starting to think about complexity theory. Actually, Gödel, in his famous letter to John von Neumann, repeats Menger's problem in 1951, talking about, is there a better than finite algorithm? Right, all right, so it's a mathematical problem. What's not known to the popular press is it was actually solved in 1962. Bellman, an independently held CARP, found a way to solve the TSP using a technique called dynamic programming. You find tours through small numbers of points and use that to get ever larger number of points. And it'd be easy to describe that in detail, but it takes about 5 minutes. So just believe me, you do sort of small points up to larger sets. And it runs to solve an n-city problem, any n-city problem, it takes n squared 2 to the power n time. Right? That's exponential, but it's way faster than n factorial. So this solves 22 points very easily on a modern computer. Okay, but it still has 2 to the n. So if n is equal to 50, then it's not going to solve the problem. So then you might ask yourself, well, yeah, if we're not happy with 2 to the n, what would we be happy with? The gold standard, though, was laid down in 1951 by John von Neumann. Von Neumann's the great applied mathematician of the last century. So he solved a relaxed version of the TSP, so closely related to the traveling salesman problem, called the assignment problem. And he showed that his running time grew as n to the power 3, so n cubed. That's, of course, much, much smaller than 2 to the n. So a strengthened version of Menger's question would be, can you solve an n-city traveling salesman problem in n raised to some power? So n squared, n cubed. So polynomial time algorithm. But in 1951, already in 1956, a great operations research pioneer, Merrill Flood, the gentleman in the dark suit, he asks for impossibility results. He thinks that it's not going to be possible to do that. Right? And in 1960s, Jack Edmonds, a great professor from Waterloo, flat out conjectures there'll never be a polynomial time algorithm. That he uses the word good to mean polynomial time. So he flat out conjectures that'll never happen. That, of course, is tied up now in this great, probably the greatest theoretical question in computer science, or in one of the top questions in all of math, the P versus NP. So it's one of the Millennium Prizes that a fast algorithm for the TSP will earn you $1 million. Proof that there is no polytime algorithm earn you $1 million. No one knows which way it'll go. It's an open question. Hollywood, of course, would like it to be P equal to NP, because that's a lot more exciting.
The entire dimension has been controlled. You can't lock it away. This is the future of the world.
So this is a thriller movie based on the premise that these people discover a fast algorithm for the TSP. And that allows you to solve any problem, including breaking cryptography. So the whole discussion is whether this is a good thing or bad thing. It's not unlike the current discussions about AGI, so general artificial intelligence. Okay, so That's what Hollywood would like. Now I have to get my connection back again. Unfortunately, we're not even getting inching closer to our polynomial time algorithm. That, amazingly, after 64 years, there's been no improvement in the 2 to the n bound. So the algorithm was very simple. As I said, I could have described it in 5 minutes. The traveling salesman problem is one of the most studied problems in computer science, applied math, and there's been no improvement. Right? That I find remarkable. So you might say, well, yeah, maybe you're asking too much. You're asking for the absolute shortest tour. What if you just want to get, within a multiplicative factor of optimality? Well, in general, you can't even do that. I mean, you can't even, unless p is equal to np, so unless you can solve the traveling salesman problem, you can't even become, say, within 10% of optimality at the current time. At any time. But for a very important special case called the triangle inequality, we can get a tour that's no more than 1.5 times longer than the shortest tour. So it's not shortest, but within 50%. The triangle inequality is that to travel from A to B, that shouldn't be any longer than taking a detour, first going to C and then to B, which makes sense. The distance you record from A to B should be the shortest distance between A to B. You satisfy that triangle inequality, you get a 1.5 approximation. And you do that by first making a spanning tree, then matching up points, and then converting that into a tour. Simple algorithm due to Nikos Christophidis. Yeah, but like Bellman-Held-Karp, it stood the test of time. It's been 44 years. Yeah, notice I didn't write 50 years. I can do subtraction. That's because 6 years ago, there was an improvement. A group used very sophisticated methods and moved it just epsilon below 1.5, right? A big deal. But, I mean, it's super cool, but I should make clear, this is not a practical method. You don't want a tour that's 1.5 times longer than the shortest tour. Easy to do better than that. So, yeah, forget about the fancy math guarantees. Can't you just find me a good tour to travel around Braunschweig? Well, that's a really popular area of study. So I don't know the exact number, but there's many, many papers written each year, including studies showing how little creatures solve the TSP. And, like bees. Bees apparently get good tours of 4 or 5 points. And I mean, it's interesting biology and kind of fun, but you shouldn't think that if you, despite the endorsement of a hero of mine, Brian Eno, you shouldn't think that to solve a traveling salesman problem, you should get a bee or a slime mold to do it for you. To solve a traveling salesman problem in practice, you would just want to get a fast solution, no guarantee. You should use modern heuristic methods. Now, sticking with the animal kingdom, I can mention that Curious George knows one of the main tricks. See what George doesn't like, his friend Bill has plotted a route that crosses itself. And if a tour crosses itself, you ought to delete those 2 edges and reconnect the paths. Then from the Pythagorean theorem, you have a shorter tour. And that was turned into a workable algorithm by Merle Flood, who I mentioned earlier. He said, forget about the geometry, just try deleting pairs of edges and reconnecting. If you get a shorter tour, then you move to it. So it's hill climbing. Like I want to find the highest place around this building. Well, I first somehow try to climb up on the balcony and keep going up. That's what you do. You repeatedly look for pairs of edges that you can uncross, and then you move to the tour. So watch how it'll clean up this bad tour, just repeatedly repairing bad pairs of edges. So it quickly turns a bad tour and a good tour. So that's known as local search because you have this landscape of tours, and it's called 2 neighbors, and they differ just by a pair of edges, and you just move to a neighboring tour that's better. And there's been a long line of research in improving this method. I'm just giving some of the highlights here. The champion for the past couple of decades has been Carl-Friedrich-Gauß-Lecture, working on Shen Lin and Brian Kernigham's basic algorithm. Brian Kernigham's the same guy that wrote the C book, the Unix programming. He designed the basic algorithm that we still use today to find good tours. So Carl-Friedrich-Gauß from Denmark, his algorithm is amazing. You give it big examples, it can find good tours. And it was his algorithm that was the main engine for our entry into the Amazon contest that I mentioned earlier. So it was interesting that Amazon wasn't interested in getting short tours. That would have been pretty easy for us. No, it wanted to find tours that drivers were happy to follow. So yeah, I mean, it seems funny, but the thing is that Amazon would work out with all their algorithms and give the driver, here, you do this, and the driver does something different. Like he didn't like the tour for some reason. Maybe there was a big doggy on some street. He didn't want to go up to it. They didn't know. They just know the drivers were not following the tours. So as part of the competition, they gave the participants 6,000 tours that drivers actually took. And these were rated as low, medium, and high quality. So the high quality ones were the tours that Amazon was happy with. They were short, efficient, and the drivers were happy with. They drove them. So the idea was that you should use that as training to develop algorithms that will produce tours that are happy tours, ones that both Amazon and the drivers liked. And the winner was going to be decided on between 3,000 test instances, which participants didn't see. So to enter the contest, you had to submit a code that would be running on Amazon servers. And it was a limited time. You had like a 12-hour time limit to handle all 3,000 instances. All right, now the actual measure of the score is a little complicated, but it was just come down to a number where 0 was a perfect match. So we went to the smallest number as possible. And many teams competed in ways that was expected. They would make a neural network to try to predict. We didn't do that. We just looked at the basic data and tried to figure out, well, what would drivers be doing facing with the routing task. And then we used local search. So the local search would make this change, and we make it such that the tour was smaller, except for we penalized the tour if it violated these rules we thought the driver should be following. So it was a very simple algorithm. This was together with Stefan Hell from Bonn and Kjeld Helsken from Roskilde in Denmark. Yeah, and if you read the description, it was clear that they were expecting artificial intelligence, deep learning, computer vision, non-conventional techniques to win. And they say compared to just traditional optimization-driven operations research, which I'm a card-carrying member of that community. So it was one of the reasons that I was quite happy that we actually won. Our team won a $100,000 prize, and we're nearly 50% better than the second-place team. So it was quite nice. So I should be happy, except for one thing. Amazon made lots of press releases to get attention to this contest, and they all say that only the simplest instances of the traveling salesman problem can be solved. Oh, that was really hurt me, because I've been trying to preach for the past 20 years that that's the opposite is true. So it's NP complete. That's an asymptotic notion. It means that as n goes off to infinity, there's probably some instances we will never be able to solve. That doesn't mean I can't solve your instance, right? And to try to illustrate that, I can point out, so together with Daniel Espinosa and Marcos Guculea from Chile and Kjeld Helsken, over the past 10 years, we've been solving larger and larger challenge traveling salesman problem instances where the distances were provided by Google Maps or the open source routing machine. So they're real walking distances. So they're not straight lines. They're taking paths and obeying all the traffic rules. The largest of these we solved just 2 months ago in March, had 102,000 stops in Japan, so bars and restaurants. And when we say we found a tour that's optimal, it's some 40 million seconds. We mean that you can't even, given that distance matrix that we have from open source routing machine, you can't even make it 1 second shorter. So we proved this was the absolute minimum. This was not something you would do on your iPhone. That took some 68 years of computing time. I happen to be 68 years old, so it's maybe not impossible, but some of these other ones were 200 years. What I'm counting is so we're working on computers that aren't otherwise busy, and counting the cores. So we're running in parallel, and I'm counting all the time, summing above all the cores. So these are hard computations. But you have to think about the size of the problem. So we routed through 80,000 bars in Korea. It took 44 years. So n is 82,000. The input is actually larger than n. It's n squared. We have the matrix of travel distances. But even think of the size as n. If you had an algorithm that ran an n to the 4th time, no constants, just n to the 4th time, it would take roughly 287 years. That's actually, it would probably take more than that because you don't really do 5 billion operations a second for this type of computing. So you have to ask yourself, would you really have an n4th algorithm? Would you really do that, or would you rather use our technology? Which I find interesting, that when we teach polynomial time algorithms, we typically say, well, as n gets big, you can't live with an exponential algorithm. You have to have polynomial time. I think it's actually the other way around in practice. If you have small examples, say you know n's never going to be more than 100, then polynomial time with a modest constant, polynomial time algorithm is great. You can rely on it that it's going to always produce a solution. And so you use that as a subroutine. It's always effective. Once n gets really large, well, the polynomial bound doesn't really mean too much if you can't possibly use that much computing time. So it's, I think, an interesting difference. All right, so what we're looking at in our work is solving specific examples of the problem. This line of research goes back to Hassler-Whitney. So he's a mathematician. People might know him for analysis, or he invented matroids. That was his concept. For the TSP, he sort of, so he met Carl Menger at Harvard. So this was 1934. He met Menger around 1931 at Harvard. And then several years later, he gives a lecture at Princeton introducing the TSP, but he doesn't talk about geometry or asymptotic complexity. He talks about a problem that you put your arms around. So a specific example, find the shortest tour to visit a city in each of the 48 states. It's only 48 states at the time, right? That became known. So the traveling salesman problem name wasn't invented yet. It became known as Whitney's 48 states problem, right? So he's interested in solving a finite example. He's posing the problem that way. Yeah, and it's his viewpoint is adopted by Julia Robinson some 10 years later. So Julia Robinson is a big figure in pure math. Right? She led the team that settled Hilbert's 10th problem. But as a postdoc, she worked at the Rand Corporation, which was probably the strongest group of optimizers ever assembled. And what did she pick to work on? The hardest problem. She's working on the traveling salesman problem, but not asymptotic complexity. She wants to do mathematics that might help for, say, modest instances, around 50 points. And it's her line of work that's picked up 5 years later in a breakthrough by George Danzig, Ray Fulkerson, Summer Johnson. Amazingly, they solved Whitney's 48 states problem by hand. Right? We commonly see in newspapers, television, even comedy shows, jokes about it, that you can't solve these problems with supercomputers. And they did it with by-hand computations. And it was a big deal at the time. And the Newsweek article is spot on. They're saying the big driver of this work was Danzig's tool of linear programming. So linear programming was invented by Danzig in the early in the 1940s. Linear programming is a simple model. I hope a lot of you know it. You're optimizing a linear function subject to linear inequality constraints. So it's like the math is linear algebra for inequality systems. Right? It's, again, a very simple model, but that allows it to get wide-scaled application. So it was named Danzig's simplex algorithm for solving LP was named one of the top 10 algorithms of the century, the last century. Not for its beauty or geometry, but for its wide-scaled application. And a lot of that application can be traced back to this TSP paper by Danzig, Fulkerson, and Johnson. Right? So you pretty much can't pick up a product where somehow linear programming wasn't used in its design, manufacture, or distribution. For the TSP itself, it's almost magical the way it can solve a problem. So this is the shortest tour through 50 points, where I'm taking a straight line, Euclidean distance. Now, if any of you are subscribers to Der Tagesspiegel, you would think, no, that's not possible. You can't even do 22 points. How did you do 50 points? Well, the thing about linear programming, it not only can draw that tour, it gives a proof that it's the shortest. So this pretty picture actually is a mathematical proof that that's the optimal tour through those points. All right, what you have are structures here, like these disks. Every point is surrounded by a disk, and a tour has to cross the disk twice. The disks are disjoint, so if you sum twice the radius of the disks, any tour has to be at least that long. Or these bands, like the yellow band here. It separates those 2 points from the remainder, so any tour has to cross it at least twice, Could have caused it more than twice, but at least twice. So twice the width of the band, you can add that to twice the radius of those disks. That's a lower bound. The length of this tour exactly meets that bound. You could do that. You could get out a ruler and measure, but it's easier. Just notice that every tour edge is completely covered by the structures, and every structure has exactly 2 edges coming out of it. Those 2 facts together mean that the bounds are the same. So that's a proof that tour is optimal, and it comes from linear programming. So it's linear programming, a general linear programming duality theory that was developed by John von Neumann. So linear programming problems comes in pairs, primal and dual. The primal, that's the one I mainly are discussing. You're minimizing, trying to get the tour as short as possible. The dual, you're maximizing, trying to make it big as possible. A simple algebra shows that any solution to the dual bounds how good you can do in a primal. So you can never pass the 2. They can't pass at night. So you can push the primal down, push the dual up, but they can't go past one another. The big theorem of von Neumann is that you push the primal as far as you can, you optimize it, optimize the dual, you get exactly the same value. Right? And you should thank the computational gods that that's true, because that's what allows linear programming problems to be solved. Right? The primal and dual certify one another that they're optimal. Because if you can never push them past one another, so you have solutions where they're equal, well, then they're optimal. That's what drives linear programming. That's how I created that picture. The particular linear programming problem was a relaxation of the TSP, known as a subtour LP. So you have a constraint that says for each point, exactly 2 edges meet that constraint, so it's an equation. And then for each subset, you have a subtour constraint, saying that if you take a subset, you have to choose at least 2 edges that cross into that subset. The picture comes from the von Neumann's dual solution. Right? So the primal variables are giving these edges in a tour. The dual variables are giving the geometric bound. This was an interpretation by Michael Junger and Bill Poulibank in the 1980s. Yeah, that's cool, but you're thinking, well, all right. But you have exponential inequalities here. For 50 points, you couldn't even write them down. Right? You couldn't even write them down. There's too many of them. Well, that's the breakthrough that Danzig, Folkestone, and Johnson had. They developed a technique now called the cutting plane method that allows you to handle such LPs. What you do is you first solve the problem without any of those constraints, and then you look, well, are some of the constraints violated? Because if you have a solution that satisfies all the constraints, well, there's no need to write them down. But if some are violated, you add them, and then you repeat. So I'll solve the problem now. So repeatedly, solve the linear programming problem, check if there's violated subtour constraints. If there are some, I add them, and I repeat. And in 8 iterations, it eventually gets to having the primal solution and a dual solution satisfying all the subtour inequalities. That solved the problem. And it's not just luck. If you give me 1,000,000 points, very quickly, this method will very quickly find the optimal to the subtour LP. But there's a problem, there's a great weakness, a theoretical weakness. I mean, it worked great in practice, but in fact, there's no polynomial bound on the number of iterations that are needed. That's really sad, because this is just the first step in our attack on the TSP, and we're already leaving the home of a polynomial time algorithm, a safe, comfortable home where we've already moved away from it. I might think, yeah, okay, Bill, but that's exponentially many constraints. How can you hope for polynomial? The real size of the LP is exponential. Well, the number of constraints doesn't matter. This was pointed out strongly by Jack Edmonds. Edmonds, I mentioned earlier. He has a matching algorithm, which is not finding a tour, but pairing up points in a minimal way. And there's a very similar dual solution, but he doesn't get it by cutting planes. He gets it by an iterative method, gradually increasing and decreasing the dual variables. I illustrated this algorithm. I wrote it on an iPad ad. And when I wrote it, I set it to music. So there's music that plays. The iterations are timed to the music. So if a dual variable is green, it's getting bigger, and if it's red, it's getting smaller. And so you see he has alternatingly green, red, and he alternates in such a way that the dual solution is increasing at each step. Wait, I liked it louder. I can hardly hear it. So I think it's beautiful the way it just sweeps across, gradually builds up that solution. In the cutting plane method, there's these sort of catastrophic changes from step to step. Not at Edmonds. Edmonds just gradually gets it, and finally he has a matching and a dual solution that shows it's optimal. The only difference is that he only has these bands around an odd number of points. Because if you have an odd number of points, you can't match them all internally. You have to use some edge that crosses the set. Just like in the TSP, you had two edges across the set. In a matching, if you have an odd number of points, you have to have one edge across the set. So it's only allowed to odd. I mean, it's just beautiful. I think even now, this was from 1965, even now it's one of the most beautiful polynomial time algorithms for combinatorial problems. It'd be brilliant if we had that for the subtour relaxation, but we don't. All right, but from the Hassler-Whitney get-it-done perspective, we can rely on the cutting plane method. This 800 points solved in only 7 iterations gives you a primal and dual solution to the subtour relaxation. So it gets the job done, except for it doesn't. I mean, von Neumann doesn't lie. The primal solution value is equal to the dual solution value, but you have to know that linear programming problems can give fractional answers, not 0, 1s. So we want 0, 1, either you use the edge or not. In this solution, you split the poor salesman in 2. He comes in and splits himself into 2. Right? You're having fractional solutions. Their value, the red ones are 0.5. So this solves the subtour polytope, but it doesn't get you the $1 million prize. It doesn't solve the TSP. All right, and that was the main point of the Danzig, Folkestone, and Johnson paper, is how do you deal with that? Right? And so it probably was frustrating to them that they sent their paper off, they get a referee's report several months later, and the referee says he doesn't believe fractional solutions exist for this problem. He thinks that there always be integers. He doesn't believe that you can get a fractional solution. All right, rather than getting mad, I mean, this is all done by paper mail, so probably send it out the next day, Folkestone just calmly writes back and gives a 6-point example, saying, no, check this one out, and gives the weight, showing that this is a fractional solution. So fractional solutions are the disease. The cure that Danzig, Folkestone, and Johnson proposed is more inequalities, more cutting planes. Right? The subtour inequality, you can put them in the LP because every tour satisfies them. All you need to do is add more inequalities satisfied by all tour. Make your LP stronger. The theoretical justification is by Minkowski, a famous theorem. Minkowski actually spent some years in Bonn, so about 6 years at Bonn, before he did this work, though. Minkowski has a theorem in convexity that in this context basically says that the linear programming always wins. There's always some perfect linear programming formulation. So there's always money in the cutting plane method. Right? If you have a fractional solution, you can always find a cutting plane. Right? Geometry, you think of it as taking points and shrink wrapping the points, the smallest convex set. That gives you a polyhedron, which is a solution set to a system of inequalities, so an LP. So that famous 48 states problem, they use 7 subtour inequalities and then 2 more complicated inequalities. Right? And so the whole point of their method is just roll up your sleeves and try to find more inequalities to add. I mean, it's all brilliant, and I think this is maybe the most important paper ever written in the computational side of discrete optimization. And yet the last line in our paper says, well, maybe some of the ideas might be useful. Right? So that's a really modest interpretation, right? Their cutting plane method is used to attack a broad swath of applied problems, integer programming and many other models. For the TSP itself, it took a while for people to understand their methods, but once they did, there's a big increase in the largest size of challenge problems that have been solved. This is on a log scale, so you can see you have this nice linear fit. You're increasingly exponentially fast. In 1987, the record size problem was Padberg and Rinaldi, Manfred Padberg, Giovanni Rinaldi. They solved a 2,000 city problem. Since then, all the records have been solved, set with our Concord solver, with Applegate, Bixby, and Quatel, and then the more recent ones with Espinosa, Gukuye, and Keld-Helsken, including this is the Japanese problem. All right, but if you're looking at your picture saying, well, you guys were sleeping for all those years? What happened between 2006 and those 20 years? Why did it take 20 years to get it a little bit? Well, the answer is simple, that some problems are harder than others. Like if you give a challenge, if I ask Philip and he gives me a nice problem, 10,000 or 100,000 points on a unit circle, well, I solve it right away. And this problem was not on a circle, but it came from a VLSI application where I had many collinear points. I can't explain which ones are easier or which ones are not, but that one was certainly easier. This is from these walking distance between weird streets in Kyoto and other places in Japan. It's wildly complicated and just was much harder to solve. I'll come back to that in a minute when I explain another way of evaluating how difficult the computations were, other than just running times. So, I was a bit misleading. Danzig, Folkes, and Johnson solved the problem by adding inequalities. In practice on very big problems, you're adding cutting planes that's great, the LP bound is increasing. Eventually, the LP bound doesn't really increase very much. So at that point, we fall back to a search method due to Elsa Lan and Alison Doig. Alison Doig is still alive. She's in the 90s, just ran a mini marathon. That's why she looks all sweaty there in Australia. Elsa Lan passed away a couple years ago. What they say is that you should split the search space. So if you have your LP and you get one of those red edges, well, it's 0.5. Well, then split it into two, either 0 or 1. So you force it equal to 0 or you force it equal to 1, resolve the LP, and reapply the cutting plane method. All right, then for each of those, if again you need to split it, you split it again. And that way you can build a search tree that eventually solves the problem. So eventually you get down tours of different lengths, and this is the optimal one. This one we don't have to split anymore because it has value bigger than our tour. So branch and bound will eventually solve the problem. I mean, it'll eventually enumerate all the tours, so it's not an issue of whether it's finite. But the name of the game is to get to a small tree. The previous world record, 2000, it doesn't really tree, it's just a single problem. Our cutting planes solve it just without any further help. For that 85,000 VLSI problem, had all these collinear. This one was from a circuit board. It also had collinear points and repetitions of the same basic design. This was just a close-up view of the VLSI. It had all these collinear points. It solved in 57. The walking distance to the US, historical sites in the US, it took 800,000 subproblems. So it's a smaller example, but took longer. So not all problems are created equal. But still, overall, based on this work of Martin Grochel, Manfred Padberg, and others, they really set the stage for our work on Concord. We solved ever larger instances. And yet the newspapers say that if you have more than a handful of cities, well, just give up. You can't possibly solve it. That's a little disappointing. So you might think, well, all right, I'm trying to be the devil's advocate. Why would they say that? Well, I showed you that list of record problems, so that's the full list. They might say, well, you're just cheating. You're just working all the time to just solve those. So I want to point out that we also solved 100 million random instances with size from n equals 10 up to n equals 2,000, so up to 2,000 points. And they're of two types. You take a square and put in random set of points and straight lines, or you take a torus and put straight lines. So in a torus, you identify the opposite sides of the square. So there are two types of problems. We have 100 million of those. The reason we look at those goes back to the earliest, after Menger stated the problem, this was the first really description I see in the literature of the TSP. And it was by the great Indian statistician, Mahalalobis. I mean, Mahalalobis was a great guy. So he was very interested in income inequality in India. And he wanted to petition the government to do a soil sample of the jute farms in Bengal. He was Bengali. All right, in order to do that, he had to give a cost estimate. But almost the entire cost was in transporting the people and equipment from place to place. So to give a cost estimate, he had to give an estimate of the length of the TSP tour. He did this seemingly independent of Menger and Whitney. Right? And he gives the argument that if you have n points in a unit square, the traveling salesman problem optimal tour is going to be proportional to the square root of n. I can illustrate that on 50 points. So I've solved 50 points, divide them all by the square root of 50, and plot it, have a histogram. And you see it's a nice normal distribution. Now watch, I'll show a movie as n goes from 50 up to 2,000, what you'll see is the mean value will decrease, but more importantly, the variance will decrease. Right? And a famous one of the most famous theorems in the traveling salesman problem is by Gillian Beerwood, Hammersley, and Houghton. They showed that if you continue that, it's going to spike around a value. With probability 1, so you have n points, a large number of n, with probability 1, the length of the optimal tour is going to be beta times the square root of n. That's really cool. That's constant. So we don't know what beta is, right? Right. They give these bounds between 0.6, just rough bounds. They weren't able to improve that. And I was giving a talk just the year just before COVID, 2019, in Dublin. And I spent several long nights trying to track down. The other two people I found were dead. But Gillian Beerwood, I couldn't find any sign that she was dead. So I eventually found her. It was a secretary of a Catholic church in London. So I wrote to this person, had her name. And then she wrote back and confirmed, yeah, I'm the Jill Beerwood from this theorem. I thought it was great, 'cause, I mean, it's an elderly woman. But she asked this really poignant question. This was a year before she died. She died in 2020. She asked, well, how far have you progressed the problem? Well, that was a little embarrassing because it's only been epsilon. So Terence Tao has a page that he put up just in February listing open constants in mathematics. And you see it's just a tiny bit improvement over all those years. Yeah, you laugh, but we haven't contributed even that tiny bit. We're only doing computational work. So on Terence Tao's page, the only thing they reference me, but the only point is in the footnote that it's suggested that the constant is 0.71. That's all we can do with our computations, right? We plotted our computations and showed that n's increasing, the mean values are going down, so we could just do a fitting and give what we think. We actually think it's 0.7124, but apparently Tal doesn't believe us. He just thinks it's 0.71. But fair enough. Give him the 3 digits. Okay. So, but again, newspapers are saying we can't do anything. Well, what are we going to do? We solve these map problems. So these are really what Salesman would have done. We solve Euclidean problems. What are the Euclidean problems in 2D? So then we thought, well, maybe we'll have 3D examples. Because problems in 3D, there's really big databases. The astronomers have really big databases. So the European Space Agency has this Gaia problem, a Gaia mission, and they gave the good estimates on the 3D location of some 2 million stars. And together with Keld-Helskin, we have a Tor and an LP bound that differ by 5 zeros, the ratio. I should point out that the optimization codes, commercial simplex, commercial mixed integer programming codes, optimization codes, if they get the 4th zero, they just stop. They say it's optimal. Well, this has 5 zeros in the approximation. That's like plotting a trip between here back to Bonn, where I'm going to on Friday. That's off by only 2 meters. So it's a very close approximation. I actually don't understand. These 3D problems seem to be easier than 2D problems, which I don't. Obviously, that can't be in general because the 2D problem isn't 3D. Just give it a 0. But if you take just a distribution of points in 3D and in 2D, the 3D ones seem to be easier. I don't understand why. The only reason we can't really solve this problem exactly is that the workhorse simplex algorithm, we're solving the LPs, this becomes the bottleneck. There's essentially been no algorithmic improvement in the simplex method over the last, well, probably more or less since the 1990s. Right? And for this problem, the simplex method is taking 99.99% of the time. So it's very difficult to do any work on it. So we're sort of stuck at what we are. But this then points out, well, the TSP might be useful for driving research into the LP. So we looked at even larger instances. So there's other databases that have 100 million stars. And at that point, you can't even do the cutting plane method. All that we could give ourselves is to solve one LP. So I had to pre-compute. There's no problem for Keld. He's just going to find a Tor, right? Not just, but he's going to use local search to find a Tor. I had to construct a single LP and then hand it to our partner at Google, Dave Applegate, one of the original people who designed the Concord code. And Andre Roa now works for Disney. He used to earlier worked for Google. I made just one big LP, and amazingly, it had a huge number of rows and columns, And after about 2 years, Dave wrote to me, well, they got it now. They sent back a dual solution. And this then gave bounds, good approximation with 3 zeros. Oh, I really would like to get the 4th zero, right? Because that's what CPEX can be optimal. All right, but I think it's amazing work that Google was able to do that. And it's not the simplex method. They had a primal dual approximation algorithm that they were using. So where does this gap come from? So we have our Tor length, and we have the LP bound. So part of the gap is that, well, Helskin probably didn't find the optimal Tor. All right, that's going to be something. We have no way of estimating how much that would be because we have no experience in that side. Then there's a difference between the optimal Tor length and the optimal LP value. Well, that's my fault. I didn't generate the right set of inequalities. That's probably the biggest part of the gap. All right, then Dave's code, the Google code, doesn't actually solve the LP. It just comes close. I don't think there's a big gap there. They have a primal dual solution. Probably they're very close. And then there's another more subtle one that you have 100 million variables. That's 100 million points to visit. That's 100 million squared variables. So Dave couldn't solve all those. I had to pick out what variables I thought were important and give them to him. So I picked out about 300 million variables. I said, just solve with those ones. And then to compute the real bound, you have to do some tricky linear programming to get a precise estimate of what you're losing. And that I did. That's how I got those bounds I mentioned. So we knew that 3% of the gap is because I didn't give Dave the right inequalities. I was happy about this first thing, that using LP information I took from Dave's computation, Kjeld was able to improve the Tor. So he lowered the gap by 18%. We're now down to 1.0014. I just want to turn that 4 into a 0. The amazing thing about it is that Google was able, Dave and Google were able to find this LP solution for this huge problem. But it's very subtle work. I told you it took 2 years to get that first one. Well, 2 years ago, I sent him a bigger LP that I'm pretty sure will get us down to the 4th zero. Dave has spent all his time doing load balancing for Google's Gemini servers. And so we don't have it yet. But I hope one day, if I give a talk again in a few years, I'll be able to say that after we solve that. So the big picture, this was the March 12th that Shandor mentioned, 1991. There's a nicely written article by Gino Collada in the New York Times. And the title of the article was Math Problem Long Baffling Slowly Yields. Well, I think it's very slowly yielding. Right? The TSP still seems baffling to me. The three major theoretical questions, the complexity bound, beta, and the polytime approximation, all just been either epsilon or no progress in the past 60 years. For computation, well, we've made some progress, but for example, David Johnson constructed a 100,000 point instance. Not nasty. He's not trying to defeat our algorithm, just random points in the square. We haven't been able to solve that. And it's not for lack of trying. Right? We have a LP and a bound. We have well beyond the 4 zeros approximation, but we haven't solved it. If you zoom in, you'll see that this solution is fractional. We just don't know enough about the TSP. So it's a weakness in our whole approach. Even for small instances, it's a bit more subtle, but there's clear weakness. When we did those estimates of the random instances to estimate beta, I sent them off to David Johnson, and he plotted them, the running times. This was a running time for these 10,000 instances with 1,000 points. I have to say, every 1,000-point instance looks the same. This random 1,000 points, they all look identical. And yet you have this normal distribution. That's OK, except for this is logs of the running time. Right? That's bad news if you think about it. If the log of the running time is exponential, is normal, that means there's a huge difference between the hardest ones and the easiest ones, even though the problems all look the same. So 2 winters ago, I repeated the experiment on 10,000-point problems. It doesn't look quite normal because I had to restart the problem after Waterloo's servers went down over the Christmas break. But again, you see this normal distribution. The difference between the easiest example and the hardest example, and again, they all look alike, is a factor of 20,000. 20,000 times harder, the slowest one versus the easiest one. And I don't know why. Maybe you could design a neural network that could somehow pick out some subtle differences. between instances. But for me, what it means is that there's something wrong with our code. So if things are going bad, they're multiplying. That's why you're getting this log factor. So I went back and just think, well, I have to be thinking less like a mathematician and more like an engineer. So as a mathematician, I like the really cool stuff we do to work well. But as an engineer, I just went back and ruthlessly went through the code. Things that are doing well, I just promoted those, giving them more time. Things that were not doing well, I do them less often. And that's what led to us being able to solve these larger problems. So 82,000 bars in Korea and 102,000 bars and restaurants in Japan. Notice that we've been doing this for 10 years. Well, actually, the TSP work, we started working with Quatel and Applegate. We started in 1988. Right? That's a long time. And so I can really relate to John Bentley. So John Bentley is the author of Programming Pearls, if you know that book, a classic programming book. He met Christos Papadimitriou, and Papadimitriou told Bentley, the TSP is not a problem, it's an addiction. And John Bentley, there was a memorial lectures for David Johnson. John Bentley commented on that.
After 40 years, I can respond to Christos. Well, the difference between me and the addict is that I can quit whenever I want to.
So he says, I can quit whenever I want to. Well, me too. I could quit whenever I want to, except for I don't want to. The TSP may be an addiction, but I don't want to cure it. Just the opposite. I would get little candies and put TSP challenge shows on the wrappers and at the carnival parade and throw them out to people. I would like to get people hooked on the TSP. Because you have a simply stated model, and yet improvements on it could be big breakthroughs, not only in the TSP, but in other types of computation. So as motivation, I could say many of the household names in discrete optimization, so simulated annealing, Lagrangian relaxation, branch and bound, all came from TSP papers. For complexity, the world expert on P versus NP is Lance Fortnow. He had this survey article in the main publication of the ACM. He uses our TSP tour. This is a pub tour through the United Kingdom as an example of what focused attention on an NP hard model can do. All right, then, his main viewpoint is that we shouldn't use P not equal to NP, because that's what we expect it to be. We shouldn't use P not equal to NP as a roadblock. We should think it as a barrier. We should think it as a roadmap, what we could do. So you have a difficult problem in medicine. If P was equal to NP, that would allow us to solve many different subproblems. So just go ahead and apply the optimization techniques, machine learning, artificial intelligence techniques, and see what you can do. So use it as an opportunity, which that fits with my thinking. So there's almost certainly limits to the power of general computation. But the question is, what are those limits and how widely do they constrain us? That's what TSP is all about. All right, so, but why should you work on a TSP? Well, I can say my own work, that earned me a fake prize by a Korean magazine. I don't read Korean well, but I looked at it. It was that they didn't like the Academy Awards of movie stars getting prizes, so they made their own fake prize, this magazine, and gave it to mathematicians. They even gave me fake hair to better compete with Peter Schulze, who was one of the other fake prize winners. I quite like that. Or you can win real prizes. So Vera Traub had her PhD from Bonn. She now moved to Zurich. She won the $50,000 Mirzakhani Prize. It's one of the breakthrough prizes. And this was a big deal. It's on national television in the US. I mean, one of the other prize winners was another discrete mathematician, Jin Yun Park. But I'll play the ceremony for Vera.
Works in combinational optimization. For example, traveling salesman problems. Questions like, if you have to make a delivery in several neighborhoods, what is the most efficient route that visits each of them only once? I'm glad you got all the big words.
Yeah. This is Professor Park, Professor Traub on stage with will.i.am, the lead singer in the Black Eyed Peas, a famous band in the U.S.
Yo, give it up to the awesome people that are helping change the world. Thank you guys so much.
So if you want to meet rap stars, maybe you might want to think about working on the TSP. Or if you rather meet your Bundeskanzler, working on TSP may get you there. So these are 5 of the prominent mathematicians I mentioned in the talk, all with their heads of state, including Martin Grütschel, together with Angela Merkel. I could give other reasons, but one of the main ones, though, is what Richard Feynman said to a young Nicholas Christofides. So Christofides met Feynman just at a coffee break at Stanford. Feynman asked what he's doing. Nicholas Christofides, this is before his paper. His paper was 2 years later. Nicholas Christofides explains the TSP. Feynman goes home, comes back the next day. Yeah, it's a hard problem. Have fun, kid. Right? So yeah, that's right. You have this problem that you can sort of put your arms around, and yet it could be breakthroughs if you could just solve it. So the great computer scientist, Richard Karp, huge portfolio of theoretical results, but he said there's nothing more thrilling than the night that he and Michael Held, code was programmed up, and they started getting the results. All right, so I think there's a lot to be done. I hope some people might contribute to that. This isn't a TSP, but I want to take one more minute, because I skipped over something, mainly because I don't know what to say. Right, so obviously we're living through both an exciting and complex area of these AI agents. So you at least have read about that, or probably most of you experience it directly. It's not clear what impact it would have. In my own work, it certainly energized it over the past few months. So the algorithmic work I presented have all been done manually, but the systems level things and putting things together and factoring into codes, this is all just phenomenally how well these did. So thinking about what to say, I was reminded of a scene from the movie Oppenheimer, where Niels Bohr is trying to convince Oppenheimer to be a student.
Algebras like sheet music, the important thing isn't can you read music, it's can you hear it. Can you hear the music, Robert?
So maybe in 2 years ago, that's what computational work is going to be like. Not whether you can read code, but can you hear the music? I mean, that's certainly possible. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Lots of inspiration, lots of insight, and I guess it would be a shame not to give Bill a chance to answer some of your interested questions, if you certainly have any. So I guess quite a few of you have been motivated, inspired, and if you are still thinking about learning more, Bill is actually also author of a couple of books on the traveling salesman problem. For those of you who feel cooked already, but I think that's a pun, so I mean everybody's motivated, and so this is actually a book I would recommend to anybody who says like, okay, I want to see more, not just about these, but also more pictures of the people involved and more stories behind this. As it happened, we were just looking up some of the originals from some joint time we spent some time ago. And for those of you who still really want to like the big challenge, there's that. But of course, it wouldn't be fair to just let you go away. And there was this question about applying this in Braunschweig, right? So obviously, we want to make sure that Bill also takes away some things. So we have for him this and a couple of things. Bill likes to drink a lot of black tea in the morning, and so there's this. And inside of this here, this is a book of aerial photographs of Braunschweig.
Okay.
We learned that 3D is maybe easier than 2D, and so yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you all.